This is a response video to GarethHallNZ's video that he's responding to me about Flash.
And let's face it, Emic has been pretty blatantly obvious that he's not a fan of Flash for various reasons. We won't get too much into it, but in saying that, maybe some things that Adobe has done on Flash is wrong and doesn't run that well on the Mac, but again, there are many solutions that many things that Flash can do.
Okay, and this is not a hateful response. This is just an intelligent conversation between two people. And he says there's many things you can do, but they haven't done them, man. They haven't done them yet. We're still waiting on them to do them. Everybody keeps saying, well, they can do this and they can do that, and they're promising magic with 10.1. Apple asked Adobe to make a good version of Mobile Flash a while ago, and they ignore them. So maybe there is a lot of stuff that can be done here and there and there. Come back and let us know when those things are done.
That is just not really achievable in HTML5 or HTML for that matter. So
okay, I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing that everything you can do in Flash can be done in HTML5, but everything you can do on the mobile platform that needs to be done can be done in HTML5. Apple's not trying to replace Flash on the desktop with HTML5. They're trying to replace Flash on their mobile devices. Okay? So from what I'm seeing, people can bark all they want to about HTML5 not being able to do this and do that and do this, but from the looks of Apple's iAds, HTML5 is completely capable of doing everything I need on a mobile device. Desktop might be a different story, but as far as a mobile device goes, HTML5 can do everything I need.
I've done videos on this before. I'm not going to go into that again. So my issue with what Emic is doing is he's making that Adobe is the bad guy. Adobe is the bad guy. But Adobe Flash or Adobe isn't the one making these irritating ads on websites.
That's not the point who's making these irritating ads. The point is the irritating ads are all over the place because of Flash. It's not the point that Adobe's not making the ads. And if the ads were a little more efficient and a little less battery hogging and resource hogging, it might be a different story. It's not about who makes the ads. That's not about it at all. If Adobe had some other kit that they used besides Flash, Apple wouldn't be blocking them. Why don't Adobe make an HTML5 kit and make games for the iPhone? That's really a bad argument.
It's not Adobe. It
is Adobe. Even though Adobe's not the ones personally making the ads, it's their clunky stuff that causes these ads to be so bad. Now you're putting the blame on the developers. It sounds like you're just as much an Adobe fanboy as I am an Apple fanboy.
Other companies, marketing companies, advertising companies, they are the ones making these ads.
Are they? Have you seen Adobe's own website here lately? Adobe is enabling these developers to make these ads. They're encouraging this Flash-rich content. So don't tell me it's these marketers, because it's not. These marketers are making ads with something that's easy and cheap. Okay? That's all there is to it. Adobe supplies the tools, and they use the tools that are supplied. If Adobe supplied better tools, the ads would be better ads.
So don't blame Adobe for that. And yes, in terms of video, it uses a lot of processing power, but it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world? Are you kidding me? I get 10 hours of battery life out of my iPad. Can you guarantee me I'm going to get 10 hours of battery life if Flash is running wild on my device? To say that Flash is a little CPU hoggish is not the end of the world. Just lets me understand that you're willing to overlook these flaws because you like Adobe so much. And that's really not that much far off than the way I feel about Apple. So we really can't throw stones if we live in glass houses. You know, now I'm not saying that Gareth is being a hypocrite at all, because he's not. Gareth is a very smart individual. But what I'm saying is the statement that so it's a little bit CPU hoggish, it's not the end of the world, that's kind of a naive statement.
It's not like it's gonna stop your computer from, I don't know, I don't see the major issue with it.
It's a major issue.
So much. But how do I drag this into the iPhone thing? And Emig gives, well, you know, this is not Emig's video, he is reading an article, but obviously Emig agrees with this article in depth, otherwise he wouldn't be reading it. So I see it as his perspective too. And, you know, Emig and this article, for that matter, makes it out that Adobe is the bad guy in this, and that they're trying to force Flash down Apple's throat.
Are they not?
And iPhone's throat and blah 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 blah. But you know, that just simply isn't the case. Adobe has been,
I just don't agree.
Playing by Apple's rules perfectly fine.
Oh, so now they don't have to?
That allowance of code, or whatever it is you want to call it, to allow cross-compiled apps to run on the iPhone was allowed by Apple. Apple allowed it. Apple opened their door up and say, hey, here is a open source, I don't know if it's open source, but here is a API that you can develop for and have cross-compiled code run on here. This was Apple's system that they made, and hence these cross-compilers.
No, Flash has been off the iPhone forever, and Adobe's been working feverishly to get this cross-conversion toolkit out so people can make their iPhone apps run on the Flash. I disagree with that. Apple did not give Adobe the tools to convert Flash to the iPhone.
Because developers go, hey, I can make something for this and for this at the same time without spending time. Obviously, it's productivity.
What don't you get, Gareth, is that if you can take one app and just write it one time and put it on this platform, that platform, that platform, and that platform, what makes this platform unique? Okay? The application store is Apple's killer app, and when you can get, and the only place to get certain wonderful apps is to go to the App Store, that's an incentive to go to the App Store. Okay? If I can get the same game here, 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 and here, what is the damn point of buying an iPhone? If I'm buying a phone so I can use apps, like a lot of people do, I'll just buy a cheap phone and just access these apps anywhere. Don't you understand the incentive Apple has to keep its apps proprietary on its store? Okay? I mean, that's like, what if Adobe Photoshop was only available on the PC? That would be a huge incentive for people to buy a PC, no matter how much they like Mac. Okay? Or just like Final Cut is a huge incentive for people to buy a Mac, because Final Cut isn't on a PC. You know, they keep that application proprietary to the Mac so people will buy Mac hardware. You keep these applications proprietary to the Apple Store and people buy Apple hardware. Okay? What you're suggesting they do is not going to benefit Apple. What you're suggesting is going to make things easier on developers. It's going to make it easier on developers to be lazy. They just got to write their app once and they can deploy it anywhere into any app store. So that makes all the app stores the same. There's nothing unique about any of them. I can go here and get the same exact game as I can get it here. Bullshit. Apple wants a unique experience and unique apps, and they're going to keep it that way. And there's nothing you can say to convince me they're not trying to force this down Apple's throat. Apple is blatantly telling you, if you don't like it, go develop for another platform. We don't want Flash on our platform, and we don't want this cross-compiler toolkit to allow you to deploy Flash apps on our platform as well as everybody else's. We don't want that. We've even changed our terms of service to stipulate that we don't want that. And Adobe is still forcing the issue, regardless of what their developers want, regardless of what they want. They're still forcing the issue. Apple don't want it, and they're still trying to force Apple to accept their cross-compiler toolkit. They're even filing complaints. Now, there's no excuse you can make to say that Adobe isn't trying to force this shit down Apple's throat, because they are.
Why wouldn't you want to kill two birds with one stone?
Because I just explained that to you. Okay? That's why there's just Mac developers and there's just PC developers. Do you understand? That's why you can only buy certain games on an Xbox or certain games on a PS3. Not all of them, but certain games are proprietary to that console. They don't want the same game on every single console. Why is that? So you'll buy their console so you can play that game. Okay? And maybe Apple's a little more locked down than other people, but that's their prerogative. And I understand them not wanting to deploy the same damn app compiled in the same damn way on every damn application store on the internet. Come on, if you can't understand why Apple don't want that, then you're blind as I am.
If you could. So, it's not like Adobe broke the rules by doing this. They were playing by the rules that Apple has set.
The rules that I see as of today do not allow it. So I don't care what the rules were yesterday or last week. The rules state now that it's not allowed, and that's the bottom line.
What I don't think has been nice, and where Apple is really playing the big brother card on its own product, and sure they're allowed to. I mean, I have no issue with Apple doing this, but what wasn't not. Let me rephrase that. Apple is perfectly within their rights to say, fuck it, we're not going to allow cross-compiled applications to run on our store or run on our system. No, that's it. We're not allowing it. I have no issue with that. I mean, it's Apple's phone, it is their OS, and they can set the rules for what you need to develop on there. What I don't think has been nice by Apple is to spring it on Adobe right by their event, by the media release, the launch of.
Well, see, I tend to counter that because Apple's been very clear for the past 3 years that they didn't want Flash on their iPhone. And now Adobe's trying to find some cross-compiling way to sneak Flash onto the iPhone through this cross-compiler kit. I'm more than sure that it pissed Apple off. I'm sure Apple's been thinking, we've been playing to you for 3 damn years that we don't want Flash on the iPhone, and now we hear about you making this cross-compiler toolkit to be released in CS5? No, I'm sure they did get their stones rubbed the wrong way. I'm not going to say how much of it was out of being a vendetta or spite, and I'm not going to say how much of it was a business decision. I don't know because I wasn't there. But I've followed Apple for a long time, and they don't bury other companies just because they can. Okay? Adobe has been very contrary about this whole Flash issue from the very beginning.
CS5. I don't think that was good, healthy competition, Apple. That was just.
And how do we know they didn't let Adobe know months beforehand? I mean, we have to assume that Adobe told Apple what they was doing with their secretive CS5 suite. You know, I didn't even know really here till recently that they could do this in CS5. I'd say only the developers knew. This is kind of a new thing. So they couldn't really change the terms of service till they released their new products that they've released. Well, I guess they could have. I can't say that. That's wrong.
Well, to put it simple, you were just plain straightforward being a fucking dick, Apple. Simple as that on my.
And I think Adobe's been being a dick for the past 5 years. Apple begged Adobe in 2006, I think, to write a native version of Photoshop for their platform. And Adobe refused to do it. They ported it. They wrote a cross-platform crap. Apple has begged for Adobe's support the past 10 years, and they've always put Windows first. Just like they made us wait a year for the 64-bit version, you all can blab out any excuse you want, but Adobe has been nothing but dicks to Apple over the past 3 years. Apple's tried to keep Flash off the iPhone, and now all of a sudden they hear about this cross-compiling kit. I'm sure it pissed them off, and I think Adobe gets what they deserve. We'll just have to agree to disagree.
I don't have an issue with Adobe, so I'm quite happy to defend Adobe.
I'm sure you are, because you use Adobe's products to make your living. Just like I use Apple's products to make my living. I don't use Adobe's products, you know. If I used Adobe's products to make my living, I might feel differently.
But I don't think that was. I think you could have handled it better, Apple.
Well, I think Adobe could have handled it better. That kit shouldn't have even been in production for the iPhone in the first place. If they want to make a cross-compiler kit for all the other app stores, that's their business. But they know Apple didn't want it from the very beginning. They knew they didn't want Flash from the very beginning. but they've been secretly trying to find a way to get it on the iPhone, and that's dickish of Adobe. They shouldn't have even tried. They knew what Flash wasn't wanted, but they tried anyway, and now they're trying to get people like you to say Apple's being dicks, when for 3 years Apple's been more than plain about Flash. So I don't want to hear about how Apple's being a dick and Adobe ain't. Adobe knew, and they're fucking trying anyway.
I think you could have maybe tell one of your biggest developers.
That's even if Adobe let Apple in on what they was doing. You know, I can't believe Adobe went to Steve Jobs and said, we're making this cross-compiler toolkit to run Flash on the iPhone 6 months or 3 months before they changed the terms of service, and Apple didn't say no. If Adobe would have come to Apple with this toolkit, Apple would have told them no. So you're not going to make me believe that Apple just now told them no. If Apple just now told them no, then Apple just now found out about it, because Adobe would not have contacted Apple and said, we're making a cross-compiler toolkit to run Flash apps on the iPhone. Steve Jobs would have said no as soon as they mentioned it. He wouldn't have had to have waited and springing on them like this. So either Adobe's kept it secret, or Apple has flat out told them months ago and they've ignored them.
Third-party developers, one of your biggest developers on your product, if it's not the biggest developer, I think you could have been a bit more open with them and say, hey.
And I think that's proof. Apple don't give a fuck who you are. You play by Apple's rules because they keep a lockdown platform that keeps it the way they want to keep it. And I'm sure they hate to lose developers, but they're not going to sacrifice their core beliefs on how their company should be run for a company like Adobe, no matter how big and how important they are to the ecosystem. And I commend Apple for that, for sticking to their beliefs and their guns and their morals and not bowing down to a software company. How can we give Adobe that much control?
We're going to shut this down because you didn't decide this in 2 days' time.
Exactly. They didn't decide this in 2 days' time. They've had to have known about it, and you're not going to sit and make me convince me for 1 minute that it took Jobs more than 30 minutes to decide if he wanted Flash on the iPhone. He didn't sit and wonder about this and tell Adobe, okay, Adobe, let me think about it for a while, and then just spring this on him 3 days before the launch. You'll never get me to believe that, ever.
You knew you were going to do this, and you were playing your time. You were waiting for it to do this right on the event where they can't.
You're making an awful lot of assumptions.
Act on.
Like Adobe's just the innocent little player being bullied around the schoolyard by the big, mean Apple. And we haven't been in the board meetings, and we don't know what's going on. All I know is Apple's been against Flash since 3 years ago, and they're still fighting them on it. Yeah, they're trying to force it.
Taking that feature out, they had already compiled all the materials for the web, the video, planned the launch, and
they didn't want nothing to do with Apple when they was the low man on the totem pole, but now that they got the majority of market share, they're wanting them back. That's ridiculous.
Everything, and then you spring it on them 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever it was before the event that this is the case. I don't think Steve Jobs told Adobe, let me think about it, and then springed it on him 3 or 4 days before. Like I said, either they told him ahead of time and they've ignored him, and Steve's got pissed, or Steve didn't know about it at all. That was good competition, Apple. I think you were just being a straight, honest fucking dick. And I don't think that was the way you could have handled it.
I think Adobe's being straight, honest dicks, since they've known for 3 years that Apple ain't wanted Flash on the iPhone platform, and yet they're still trying to make this cross-platform compiler bullshit, knowing that Flash ain't wanted. That's being a dick.
You could have handled it better. And let's face it, Apple, that this is not the first time you've done it. You've done it with the previous release of CS4 as well, when Photoshop was going to go 64 and 64-bit, and you did the same thing.
Bullshit. You're completely and utterly wrong. Apple let the developers know that they were switching 2 years ahead of time. 2 years. And if 2 years ain't enough for Adobe to get their act together, then fuck them. They've decided to wait. They've decided to wait instead of rushing and compiling the 64-bit version. They decided just to wait. And that's what pisses me off. You're not going to come in here and convince me that, oh, Apple just up and switched to Cocoa on them. You do the research. Apple gave developers at least a good 2-year head of start. They told them, listen, you guys better start making your apps in Cocoa or whatever it is, because we're switching to it. They gave them a way heads-up notice. So this right here is bullshit.
You drop support for
Carbon?
one of the base standards on the OS being carbon.
As a matter of fact, I got a quote from Adobe saying it was Apple's choice, and it's up to Adobe to adapt. So why are you not adopting, Adobe? Why are you not adapting?
Did the same thing there, and you sprung it on Adobe. And
Sorry, guys.
Apple, it's not that you're hurting Adobe that makes me cross. Competition is competition in the day. What pisses me off is that you are hurting the consumers. You're hurting me, and you're hurting other developers.
You're not hurting the consumers. The consumers could care less about fucking Flash. The only people that's pissed off are the developers that can't write real code in the first place. Flash is a visual programming language. It ain't even really real code. We can argue about that to the day we die. And I understand people make a living on Flash, and I understand people are defensive about this, but it's time to move on. Apple don't want it, and there's not a thing we can do about it. You can think they're dicks, you can think they're jerks, and you can think they're wrong. But the bottom line is, it's their decision to make. And if you wonder what I'm looking at, I'm looking for that quote where Adobe said it was up to them to adopt, and they still haven't adapted to anything.
Use these products. That's people that use Photoshop. If you do lots of video stuff or really high intensive stuff, you need that 64-bit Photoshop. You were hurting them when you did that, and the same goes for now with CS5. Several developers, might have gone as well. I'm not going to bother by learning a whole new programming language to write and
Well, then you know what, man? That's your loss. You can choose to miss out on the biggest developing section of mobile computing. If you don't want to adapt with the times and you want to try and force this old Flash stuff, that is definitely, people are moving away from it, no matter how much people want to admit it. People's moving away from Flash, and if you can't adopt with the times, then just float on down the rivers. All I can say, go to Android. They'll have you.
Objective-C or whatever. I'm a Flash developer. Hey, fuck, this thing is coming out. I might as well just port it over. So many people might have been waiting for these features, and what are you doing this? You are hurting them. So
hurting them. But you see, it's better to hurt them than to hurt themselves. Here's a scenario for you, Gareth. Apple wants to update their iPhone operating system, and when they do, it breaks thousands of Flash compiled apps that are on the App Store. Okay, it breaks them all because of a certain update. So what's Apple left doing? They're left waiting on Adobe to upgrade their bullshit before they can release their OS update. Because if they don't wait on Adobe to update their shit, they're going to break thousands of apps. So can you tell me a way around that? Can you tell me why in all hell Apple should give Adobe that kind of fucking control over their platform? You can't, because it's ridiculous. You're just pissed off because you use Flash. That's all there is to it. And again, this is not an attack video on Gareth. I think Gareth is a great guy. He's a smart guy, and we've argued like this in the past, but we always continue to be friends.
Apple, you are hurting your own consumers by...
You're not hurting the consumers. 90% of consumers could give a shit about Flash. Look how the iPhone and iPad are selling without Flash. Consumers don't care. It's only developers and techies that really care.
Doing shit like that. And that's not a good way of doing things, man. I don't think that's nice. So, competition is competition. And again, I don't mind Apple doing this. I'm saying that Apple could have let other developers know that do these things and say, hey, we're going to shut it down and make it more... But not 48 hours. If you did it a week before, I would have still gone, oh, okay, they did kind of warn them. But not 24, 48 hours before the event. No.
Adobe's are big boys. They should have had a damn clue about what was going on. I think they've been trying to sneak it in and pissed them off.
Man, come on. That's not nice. And, Apple knows that Adobe can't take its product and just leave. They know that because Adobe...
Well, I'm glad that Apple's finally in that position, because 10 years ago, Apple had to bow to Adobe, because if Adobe left their platform, where would they be? But now they have some kind of the power to control their own platform, and Adobe can't stand it, it don't seem like.
Obviously makes a lot of money from Apple and selling Photoshop and these sort of things from that. But in saying that, what would happen if they did, Apple?
What would happen? We would run boot camp, Gareth. That's what we would do. We would run boot camp. And do you think Apple couldn't make their own Photoshop competitor? You don't think they could make their own After Effects competitor? They already have Final Cut Studio. If you really think they ain't got the resources to make a true Photoshop competitor, then you're crazy, because they're already competing head to head with Lightroom.
How many people is going to stop using OS 10?
Nobody. 80% of people would just start using Boot Camp, or they'd find something else. I guarantee it.
If they cannot run these apps. And you know what? I'm one of them. If Adobe left Apple tomorrow, you can beat your ass in 2-3 years time. I'm not going to be around anymore.
Bye. Don't let the Creative Suite hit you on the ass on the way out.
And it's not because I am an Adobe loyalist. It goes about that their products offers the solutions I need to do my business.
And as do tons of millions of iPhone developers that write Objective-C. Apple has created a whole new ecosystem and give millions of people jobs, just as Adobe has.
That's what it comes down to. And if you can bring out equivalent products to develop for, then hey, I will quite possibly stay with you and keep on using your product. But the chances are you cannot quickly develop a fully featured piece of software.
I wouldn't underestimate them. Apple just assume if not make a software, they just assume say see you later, and that's just how Apple is. I mean, they're the type of company that will not sacrifice what they want to do, and if they would rather go under first.
Like Photoshop or Dreamweaver, very quickly, very easily. There is serious development time that have to go into that. So what I'm saying...
Exactly, and the code that CS has got, and it's just old and clunky. It's time to write some new stuff.
Is that if Adobe did go, fuck you Apple, you know what? You will lose a big chunk of your clients.
And I tend to disagree with you, because everybody who runs Mac Pros or iMacs can just run Boot Camp, Gareth. Nobody's going to go out and buy a $3,000 machine on principle when they can just run Boot Camp to get the software. That's what Mac users have been doing forever. Are we ridiculing Eon Fusion? No. What people do is they go out and they buy a Boot Camp and run Fusion that way. There's several. Look at Autodesk. Look at 3ds Max is PC only. What do people do? They run Boot Camp on their Mac.
Because people will simply be forced to shift.
People won't shift. The only people that will have to shift are people who don't have machines strong enough to run the stuff on Boot Camp. You know, that's it. Nobody will have to shift. I don't understand what you're talking about. Boot Camp is completely free
to the Windows platform. Now, sure, there's boot,
and they don't care if you use OS 10 or Windows, as long as you buy their hardware. No matter what you're running on that hardware, as long as you got Apple's hardware, that's all that matters to them.
Boot Camp and stuff, but you know what? It's going to happen that you're just going to go, well, why buy a Mac?
Because I get Boot Camp and OS 10. Why buy a Mac? Because of the build quality, because I got OS 10 applications and Boot Camp applications, because I can use Final Cut Studio. Final Cut Studio is just as important to my business as Adobe Suite is. So I can't run Final Cut Studio on a PC no matter what. I do have the option of running Adobe Suite via Boot Camp, so instead of switching to PC, I'm just going to run Boot Camp. You underestimate the power of Boot Camp, and I think you underestimate how Boot Camp has made Apple really as popular as it is today. Many people switched to Apple because they knew they could still run Windows in the background if they wanted to. I don't know if you're underestimating the power of Boot Camp because you're in denial or because you really believe that.
Why should I buy a Mac if I can't run OS 10? And this is
You can run OS 10. The only thing you're going to have to run Boot Camp for would be the Creative Suite. That'd be it. And I'm not willing to sacrifice being on Windows 24/7, and I don't think a lot of Mac users are either. I think a lot of Mac users who use Macs would rather use Adobe Creative Suite on Boot Camp than sacrifice their whole experience to Windows. Fuck that. I don't want to do everything on Windows. I'll just run Adobe Creative Suite on Windows. Why do I need to do fucking everything? I'll use OS 10 for everything else.
Argument you go that OS 10 is everything. So I don't know. For me, I don't think that's been a very good move on Apple's part. No problem with the move, but I don't think it's a good move in timing. I think they could have been a little bit more transparent about their actions.
And again, we don't know the transpiring dealings that were going on behind the dealings going on behind the table, behind closed doors. Apple might have told them a long time ago, hey, we don't want this. And to be honest, they should have known. They shouldn't have had to ask Apple anything. They should have known this wouldn't be a problem. And like I said before, either Apple didn't know about it, or they've told them ahead of time and Adobe's decided to go ahead anyway. Okay, Apple has not looked at Adobe and said, we'll think about it, and then waited till 3 days before the announcement and said no. I don't believe that. Never will believe that.
In this case, I don't know what the story is between Adobe and Apple at this stage, because I found it interesting to watch the event with Adobe, and they only used Macs to demo the products, in case no one noticed. Well, the one I watched anyway, all of it, everything they demoed was...
That's what I don't understand, and it seems like they would work harder to get the Mac stuff up to date. Get the Flash working. Put out a great version of Flash, put it on other platforms, and prove Apple that they're wrong. Develop an outstanding version of Flash, distribute it on Android, and show me and Apple and everybody else how wrong we were. But I don't think you're going to do that because you're too lazy. I think you're lazy. You make great products, but you're lazy. I think you're like Microsoft. I think you've skated on market share. I think you've had some great innovations early on, and you skated on those innovations and your market share because each substantial release has just bug fixes and updates. You're charging people for bug fixes and updates and not a whole lot of new features, if you ask me. And it would be different if this happened once in a while, but it seems like this has been your development habits for the past few years.
It was actually done on a tablet kind of Mac. I assume it was like a mod book. I'm interested to see what mod book it was, if in case it was a mod book or some other kind of solution. But yeah, that was something. So anyway,
okay, that's it. So like I said, I know in my videos I come off as a dick, I come off as a smart ass, I come off as hostile, but that's just me. I'm not meaning any disrespect to Gareth. I understand he makes a living with those products and he has a passion for those products, and if anybody can understand that, I can understand that because I have a passion for my Apple products as well. So this is not an attack on Gareth, no matter how dickish or smart ass I might sound, because Gareth makes some valid points and I understand his frustration. I really do. And so this was not meant to insult Gareth or attack Gareth. I just was trying to shed some light on to maybe help him understand why we feel the way we do about Flash. And I'm sorry if I come off as being a dick or anything. That's just maybe the way I am. Maybe that's just how I seem to be. Even though I'm not trying to be a dick, maybe I seem like I am a lot of times. So I apologize if I did. So there's my opinion. See you next time. OS 10, brothers.